The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged terrain of Yellowstone National Park as Ranger Marcus Thompson began his routine patrol through the backcountry. At 35, Marcus had spent nearly a decade protecting this wilderness, but today would test every survival skill he had learned. The crisp October air carried the scent of pine and the distant sound of elk bugling, creating what should have been a perfect day for monitoring the park's wildlife populations. Marcus rode his trusted horse, Dakota, along a narrow trail that wound through dense forest and rocky outcroppings. His radio crackled occasionally with routine check-ins from other rangers, but the reception grew weaker as he ventured deeper into the remote sections of the park. This particular area had been experiencing unusual wildlife activity, with reports of a mysterious wild stallion that seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost. The stallion had become something of a legend among the park staff. Visitors occasionally caught glimpses of a magnificent black horse with silver markings, always alone, always watching from a distance. Some claimed it was an escaped domestic horse, while others believed it was a descendant of the wild horses that once roamed these lands freely. Marcus had been tasked with investigating these sightings and determining if intervention was necessary. As he navigated a particularly challenging section of the trail, Marcus noticed fresh hoof prints in the soft earth. They were larger than Dakota's prints and showed no signs of horseshoes, confirming his suspicions about the wild stallion's presence in the area. The tracks led toward a steep ravine that dropped nearly 50 feet to a rocky streambed below. Ancient trees clung to the ravine walls, their gnarled roots creating a natural latticework of handholds and obstacles. Dakota suddenly became nervous, snorting and sidestepping as they approached the ravine's edge. Marcus dismounted to calm his horse and examine the area more closely. The ground here was unstable, with loose rocks and eroded soil that shifted under his weight. As he leaned forward to get a better look at the hoof prints, he heard a sharp crack behind him. A dead tree branch, weakened by recent storms, had chosen that exact moment to break free from its trunk. The heavy limb struck Marcus across the back of his legs, sending him tumbling forward toward the ravine. In a desperate attempt to save himself, he grabbed for anything within reach, his hands finding a thick root protruding from the cliff face. The impact was jarring, and Marcus felt his ankle twist violently as his body swung against the rocky wall. Pain shot through his leg as he dangled precariously, his grip on the root the only thing preventing a fatal fall to the rocks below. Dakota, startled by the commotion, had bolted back down the trail, leaving Marcus completely alone in this remote section of the wilderness. Marcus tried to pull himself up, but the combination of his injured ankle and the awkward angle made it impossible. The root was strong enough to hold his weight, but his position was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. His radio had fallen during the tumble and now lay shattered on a ledge just out of reach. With each passing minute, his grip grew weaker, and panic began to set in as he realized the gravity of his situation. The ravine wall stretched endlessly above and below him, offering no alternative handholds or footholds within reach. The nearest hiking trail was miles away, and his scheduled check-in wasn't for another 6 hours. Fellow rangers would eventually come looking for him, but finding someone in this vast wilderness could take days, especially if they started their search in the wrong area. As Marcus hung there fighting exhaustion and pain, he began to understand how quickly a routine day could turn into a life-threatening emergency. The wilderness that he loved and protected was now testing his will to survive in the most fundamental way possible. Every muscle in his arms burned with the effort of maintaining his grip, while his injured ankle throbbed with each heartbeat. The sound of the wind through the trees seemed to mock his predicament, and Marcus realized that his survival now depended entirely on factors beyond his control. Would Dakota find his way back to the ranger station and alert others to his absence? Would another ranger happen to patrol this remote area? Or would he have to find the strength to hold on until his scheduled check-in time arrived? As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Marcus closed his eyes and tried to conserve his energy while maintaining his precarious grip on life itself. Little did he know that help was already on its way, though it would come from the most unexpected source imaginable. 2 hours had passed since Marcus began his desperate fight for survival. His hands were cramping severely, and small cuts from the rough bark had begun to bleed, making his grip even more precarious. The autumn sun climbed higher in the sky, but the ravine remained shrouded in cool shadows that chilled him to the bone. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold, and his breathing had become labored from the constant strain. Just as Marcus felt his strength beginning to fail completely, a sound echoed through the forest that made him question his sanity. The rhythmic pounding of hooves on rocky ground grew steadily louder, approaching from the direction of the main trail. At first he hoped it might be Dakota returning, but the gait was different, more powerful, more deliberate than his gentle gelding's careful steps. Through the trees above, Marcus caught his first glimpse of the legendary black stallion. The horse was even more magnificent than the reports had described. Standing nearly 17 hands high, his coal-black coat seemed to absorb the dappled sunlight, while distinctive silver markings adorned his chest and legs like natural armor. His mane flowed freely in the breeze, and his eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. The stallion approached the edge of the ravine with cautious steps, his nostrils flaring as he took in the scene before him. Marcus watched in amazement as the wild horse studied his predicament, moving back and forth along the rim as if assessing the situation from different angles. The animal's behavior was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed in his years of wildlife observation. Most wild horses would have fled at the first sign of human presence, but this stallion remained calm and focused. He lowered his massive head toward the ravine, and Marcus could swear the horse was looking directly at him. Their eyes met across the impossible distance, and Marcus felt a connection that defied logical explanation. The stallion snorted softly, a sound that seemed almost like acknowledgement. For several minutes, the stallion paced along the ravine's edge, occasionally pawing at the ground with his front hooves. Marcus watched in fascination as the horse appeared to be examining different approaches to the problem. The animal's problem-solving behavior was extraordinary, suggesting a level of cognitive ability that challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about equine intelligence. Suddenly, the stallion disappeared from view, moving away from the ravine with purposeful strides. Marcus felt his heart sink, assuming the horse had lost interest and wandered off to find food or water. The brief hope that had sustained him during those incredible minutes of connection began to fade, replaced by the grim reality of his situation. But the stallion hadn't abandoned him. Within 20 minutes, the sound of hooves returned, this time accompanied by something being dragged across the forest floor. Marcus strained to see what was happening above, but his position limited his view to small patches of sky and overhanging branches. The stallion reappeared at the ravine's edge, and Marcus gasped at what he saw. The resourceful horse had somehow managed to drag a fallen log to the edge of the ravine. The log was perhaps 15 feet long and thick enough to support considerable weight. Using his powerful neck and chest, the stallion began maneuvering the log into position. What happened next defied everything Marcus understood about animal behavior. The stallion carefully positioned one end of the log on solid ground near the ravine's edge, then used his weight to lever the other end down toward Marcus's position. The horse's movements were deliberate and calculated, showing an understanding of basic physics that seemed impossible for a wild animal. The log descended slowly, guided by the stallion's careful adjustments. Marcus watched in awe as his unlikely rescuer demonstrated not only intelligence, but also genuine concern for his welfare. Several times the stallion paused to reposition himself, ensuring the log would reach Marcus safely without crushing him against the ravine wall. As the log drew closer, Marcus realized he would need to time his movements perfectly. His grip on the root was failing rapidly, and he would have only one chance to transfer his weight to the makeshift bridge. The stallion seemed to sense his predicament and held the log steady, maintaining perfect balance despite the awkward leverage required. Marcus took a deep breath and made his move. Releasing his death grip on the root, he lunged toward the descending log and managed to wrap his arms around its rough bark. The sudden shift in weight caused the log to swing slightly, but the stallion adjusted his position immediately, preventing Marcus from being slammed into the rocky wall. Slowly, carefully, Marcus began to climb hand over hand up the improvised rescue ladder. Every movement sent shooting pains through his injured ankle, but the promise of safety drove him onward. Above him, the stallion maintained his position with unwavering determination, occasionally shifting his weight to keep the log stable as Marcus ascended. The climb seemed to take forever, but finally Marcus's hands reached the edge of the ravine. With a final surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, he pulled himself over the rim and collapsed onto solid ground. For several minutes he lay gasping in the pine needles, hardly believing he was alive. When Marcus finally looked up, the stallion was standing nearby, watching him with those remarkable, intelligent eyes. The horse had saved his life through an act of compassion and problem-solving that challenged every scientific understanding of animal cognition. As Marcus struggled to sit up, he wondered if anyone would ever believe what had just transpired in this remote corner of the wilderness. Marcus sat on the ground, still trembling from his ordeal and staring at the magnificent stallion who had saved his life. The horse stood about 20 feet away, neither approaching nor retreating, simply observing Marcus with those penetrating dark eyes. The ranger's ankle throbbed with each heartbeat, and he could already see swelling beginning through his torn uniform pants. Attempting to stand proved impossible without support. The moment Marcus put weight on his injured foot, sharp pain shot up his leg, forcing him back to the ground. He was alive, but still stranded miles from help with no radio and no horse. The irony wasn't lost on him that his rescuer was the very wild stallion he had come here to investigate. The stallion took a tentative step closer, his ears pricked forward in what appeared to be curiosity rather than aggression. Marcus remained perfectly still, understanding that any sudden movement might spook the animal and end this extraordinary encounter. In his years as a ranger, he had learned to read animal body language, and everything about this horse suggested intelligence and gentleness despite his wild nature. Reaching slowly into his jacket pocket, Marcus pulled out an energy bar from his emergency supplies. He broke off a piece and extended it toward the stallion, speaking in low, soothing tones. The horse's nostrils flared as he caught the scent, and after several minutes of careful consideration, he took a few steps closer. The stallion stretched his neck forward, his soft muzzle barely touching Marcus's outstretched hand before quickly pulling back. This ritual repeated several times, with the horse gradually building confidence in the stranger who posed no threat. Finally, the stallion gently took the offered food, his whiskers tickling Marcus's palm in the process. As the horse chewed thoughtfully, Marcus began to speak to him in a quiet, conversational tone. He told the stallion about his work in the park, about the reports of a mysterious black horse, and about his current predicament. While the horse couldn't understand the words, he seemed to respond to the calm tenor of Marcus's voice, moving closer with each passing minute. When Marcus attempted to stand again, supporting his weight on a nearby boulder, the stallion watched with what appeared to be concern. The horse circled around to Marcus's injured side and positioned himself close enough that the ranger could potentially use him for support. This behavior was so unusual, so deliberately helpful, that Marcus wondered if this stallion had once lived among humans. Testing the waters, Marcus placed his hand on the stallion's neck. The horse tensed momentarily but didn't move away. Gradually, Marcus transferred more of his weight to the animal, using him as a living crutch to take a few experimental steps. The stallion moved slowly and carefully, seeming to understand that his human companion was injured and needed assistance. Over the next hour, an extraordinary partnership developed between the injured ranger and the wild horse. The stallion allowed Marcus to lean against him while they moved slowly along the ravine's edge, searching for the easiest route back toward the main trail. Whenever Marcus needed to rest, the horse would stop and wait patiently, never showing signs of impatience or desire to leave. During one of these rest periods, Marcus examined the stallion more closely and noticed several telling details. Faint marks on the horse's back suggested he had once worn a saddle, and his responses to human contact indicated previous domestication. Most tellingly, Marcus discovered a small scar on the stallion's left shoulder that looked suspiciously like a healed brand mark, though time and weather had made it nearly impossible to read. The pieces of a puzzle began forming in Marcus's mind. This wasn't just any wild horse. This was likely an animal with a history, possibly one who had escaped or been abandoned years ago and learned to survive in the wilderness. The stallion's remarkable intelligence and problem-solving abilities suddenly made more sense if he had received training from humans in his past. As they continued their slow journey, Marcus found himself sharing more of his thoughts with his unlikely companion. He spoke about his love for the wilderness, his commitment to protecting wildlife, and his growing amazement at the stallion's behavior. The horse's ears swiveled constantly, always alert to his surroundings but clearly listening to Marcus's voice. The afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting longer shadows through the forest. Marcus knew they needed to reach the main trail before darkness fell, as navigating the rough terrain would become even more dangerous in the dark. His ankle was swelling badly now, and each step required tremendous effort despite the stallion's patient assistance. Just as fatigue threatened to overwhelm him completely, Marcus heard a sound that filled him with relief, the distant whinnying of a horse. Dakota had either found his way back or been located by other rangers. The stallion heard it too, his head lifting and ears pricking forward as he answered with a powerful call that echoed through the forest. Within minutes, the sound of multiple horses and human voices could be heard approaching through the trees. Marcus's rescue was finally at hand, but as help drew near, he realized that his relationship with the wild stallion was about to become complicated. How could he explain what had happened? More importantly, how could he protect this remarkable animal from those who might not understand his extraordinary nature? The stallion seemed to sense the approaching humans and began to grow restless. He had fulfilled his role as rescuer, but his wild instincts were telling him to flee before the situation became overwhelming. Marcus found himself torn between gratitude for his impending rescue and sorrow at the thought of losing his connection with this incredible horse. As voices grew clearer and the rescue party drew closer, Marcus placed his hand on the stallion's neck one final time, whispering words of thanks that came from the depths of his heart. What happened next would determine not only Marcus's future, but also the fate of the wild horse who had chosen to save a human's life. The sound of breaking branches and urgent voices grew steadily louder as the rescue team approached through the dense forest. Marcus could hear at least 3 different people calling his name, along with the familiar snorting and heavy breathing of horses being pushed hard through difficult terrain. His heart raced with anticipation, but also with concern for what might happen when the team discovered him with the legendary wild stallion. The black horse beside him grew increasingly agitated as the sounds of approaching humans filled the air. His muscles tensed beneath Marcus's hand, and his eyes darted constantly between the trees, searching for escape routes. Every instinct in the stallion's body screamed at him to flee, yet he remained beside the injured ranger, torn between his wild nature and an inexplicable loyalty to the human who needed his help. Sarah Mitchell, the park's lead veterinarian, burst through the tree line first, mounted on her sturdy bay mare. Her eyes widened in astonishment when she saw Marcus leaning against the magnificent black stallion, both of them standing near the dangerous ravine. Behind her came Rangers Tom Bradley and Jennifer Walsh, leading a pack horse loaded with medical supplies and rescue equipment. The moment the rescue team appeared, the wild stallion made his decision. With a powerful snort that sounded almost like a farewell, he pulled away from Marcus and bounded toward the forest. His movement was so sudden that Marcus nearly fell, catching himself against a tree trunk just as his colleagues rushed forward to support him. Sarah dismounted quickly and hurried to Marcus's side, her trained eyes immediately assessing his condition. Tom and Jennifer secured their horses and began unpacking medical supplies, their faces showing relief at finding their colleague alive but clearly puzzled by what they had witnessed. "Marcus, thank God you're alive," Sarah said, carefully examining his swollen ankle. "We've been searching for hours after Dakota showed up at the station without you. But what in the world was that horse doing here? Was that the wild stallion everyone's been talking about?" Marcus looked toward the trees where the stallion had disappeared, then back at his concerned colleagues. How could he possibly explain what had happened without sounding completely insane? The story of a wild horse rescuing a human through deliberate problem-solving and compassion would challenge everything they thought they knew about animal behavior. "It's complicated," Marcus began, wincing as Sarah probed his injured ankle. "That stallion, he saved my life. I fell into the ravine and was hanging by my hands for hours. He found me and actually lowered a log down to help me climb out." The 3 rescuers exchanged glances that clearly conveyed their skepticism. Tom Bradley, a veteran ranger with 20 years of experience, shook his head slowly. "Marcus, you've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes after a serious accident, our memories can play tricks on us. The important thing is that you're safe now." Jennifer Walsh was more direct in her disbelief. "A wild horse deliberately rescued you? Come on, Marcus. That's impossible. Wild animals don't think that way. You probably just got lucky and found a way to climb out on your own, then encountered the horse afterward." Sarah remained focused on treating Marcus's injuries, but he could see the doubt in her eyes as well. She carefully wrapped his ankle with an elastic bandage and prepared a splint to stabilize the joint for transport. Her medical training told her that trauma victims often constructed elaborate explanations for events they couldn't fully remember or understand. As the team prepared to evacuate Marcus, he pointed toward the ravine's edge where the log still lay partially extended over the precipice. "Look at that log," he insisted. "How did it get positioned like that if the horse didn't put it there?" "The positioning is too precise to be accidental." Tom walked over to examine the log, his expression thoughtful. The piece of deadfall was indeed positioned in an unusual way, angled down into the ravine as if it had been deliberately placed. However, his practical mind searched for logical explanations. Could have been moved by wind, or maybe it fell that way naturally. Sometimes these old logs settle into strange positions after storms. Despite their skepticism, Marcus's colleagues treated him with the respect and care that their friendship and professional relationship demanded. They helped him onto the pack horse and began the slow journey back toward the main trail, where a Park Service vehicle waited to transport him to the medical clinic. As they traveled, Marcus continued to share details of his experience. Describing the stallion's behavior with scientific precision, he talked about the horse's problem-solving abilities, his apparent understanding of Marcus's predicament, and the deliberate way he had maneuvered the log into position. His colleagues listened politely but remained unconvinced. "Even if a horse did help you somehow," Jennifer said gently, "it would have been purely instinctual behavior. Animals sometimes act in ways that appear helpful to humans, but they're not actually reasoning through complex problems or feeling compassion the way we do." Sarah nodded in agreement. "I've seen horses show concern for injured herdmates, and they can be remarkably intuitive about human emotions. But what you're describing goes far beyond normal equine behavior. The stress of your situation might have caused you to interpret the horse's natural curiosity as something more intentional." The more his colleagues explained away his experience with logical, scientific reasoning, the more frustrated Marcus became. He knew what he had witnessed, and the evidence of his rescue was undeniable. The log placement, the stallion's deliberate actions, and the careful way the horse had helped him walk. None of it could be explained by instinct or coincidence. As they finally reached the waiting vehicle, Marcus made a decision that would affect the rest of his career and his relationship with the wild stallion. Rather than continue arguing with his skeptical colleagues, he would focus on documenting everything he could remember about the incident. Somehow he would find a way to prove that the black stallion possessed intelligence and compassion that challenged conventional understanding of animal cognition. More importantly, he realized that his experience had created a responsibility. The stallion had revealed himself to save a human life, and now Marcus owed it to him to ensure that this remarkable animal remained protected in his wilderness home. The last thing he wanted was for well-meaning wildlife managers to capture the horse in the name of studying his unusual behavior. As the rescue vehicle pulled away from the forest, Marcus took one last look back at the trees where his unlikely savior had disappeared. Somewhere in that wilderness, the black stallion was continuing his solitary existence, carrying with him the secret of a compassion that transcended species boundaries. 3 weeks after his rescue, Marcus sat in his small office at the ranger station, surrounded by research materials and historical documents spread across every available surface. His ankle had healed enough to allow limited mobility with a walking boot, but his real recovery had become an obsession with proving what had happened in that remote ravine. The official incident report filed by his colleagues described his rescue in clinical terms. Ranger Thompson sustained ankle injury in accidental fall, managed self-rescue using available materials, encountered wild horse during evacuation. No mention was made of the stallion's active role in saving his life, reducing the entire extraordinary event to a routine accident report. Marcus had spent every available hour researching the history of horses in Yellowstone, diving deep into archives that dated back to the park's establishment. What he discovered painted a fascinating picture of the relationship between horses and this wilderness area that few people knew about. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, hundreds of horses had lived and worked in what would become Yellowstone National Park. Ranch horses, cavalry mounts, pack animals, and even some wild mustangs had roamed these lands before motorized vehicles made them obsolete. Most had been removed when the park was established, but Marcus found several documented cases of horses that had escaped capture and disappeared into the wilderness. One particular document caught his attention. A 1923 report about a missing cavalry horse named Thunder. The description matched his stallion perfectly. A large black horse with distinctive silver markings, known for exceptional intelligence and problem-solving abilities. Thunder had been the mount of Sergeant William Hayes, who described him as the smartest horse I've ever known, capable of understanding situations better than most men. According to the report, Thunder had disappeared during a winter storm, while Hayes was on patrol near the same area where Marcus had his accident. Search parties found no trace of the horse, and he was presumed dead. However, for years afterward, park workers reported sightings of a mysterious black stallion in remote areas of the park. Marcus realized he might be looking at evidence of an equine bloodline that had survived in the wilderness for over a century. If Thunder had indeed survived and found a way to breed with escaped domestic mares or even wild horses from outside the park, his descendants could have inherited not only his physical characteristics, but also his remarkable intelligence. Armed with this historical context, Marcus began a careful campaign to document the modern stallion's behavior. He requested permission to conduct a long-term behavioral study, framing it as research into the adaptation patterns of feral horses in wilderness environments. His supervisors, impressed by his dedication despite his recent injury, approved the project. Marcus returned to the remote area where his rescue had occurred, this time equipped with trail cameras, GPS tracking equipment, and weeks of supplies. He set up a discreet observation camp nearly a mile from the ravine, positioned to monitor the stallion's movements without disturbing his natural behavior patterns. The first week yielded no results, and Marcus began to worry that the stallion had moved to a different territory. However, on the 8th day, his trail cameras captured something extraordinary. The black horse appeared in multiple locations throughout the area, and his behavior suggested he was actively searching for something, or someone. In one particularly compelling video sequence, the stallion approached the exact spot where Marcus had fallen into the ravine. The horse spent several minutes examining the area, sniffing the ground where Marcus had lain during his recovery, and even touching the log that had served as his rescue ladder. The animal's behavior displayed a clear emotional connection to the events that had transpired there. Over the following weeks, Marcus documented increasingly remarkable behavior from the stallion. The horse demonstrated advanced problem-solving skills, manipulating his environment in ways that suggested abstract thinking. He was observed moving fallen logs to create bridges over streams, using rocks to knock fruit from high tree branches, and even appearing to cache food supplies in hidden locations for times of scarcity. Most significantly, Marcus discovered that the stallion was not entirely alone. Trail cameras revealed that he occasionally interacted with other wildlife in ways that seemed almost protective. The horse was filmed standing guard while deer drank from a stream, and in one remarkable sequence, he appeared to guide a lost elk calf back toward its herd. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a wildlife behaviorist from the University of Colorado, agreed to review Marcus's documentation after he reached out to academic contacts. Her analysis of the video footage and behavioral data confirmed what Marcus had suspected. The stallion displayed cognitive abilities far beyond normal equine intelligence. What you've documented here challenges our fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness, Dr. Rodriguez wrote in her preliminary report. This horse shows evidence of empathy, abstract reasoning, and complex problem-solving that rivals some primate species. The rescue incident you described is entirely consistent with the behavioral patterns shown in your camera footage. With scientific validation of his observations, Marcus felt vindicated but also increasingly protective of the stallion. Word of his research was beginning to spread through academic circles, and he knew it was only a matter of time before other researchers would want to study the remarkable horse. The last thing he wanted was for the stallion to become a test subject or tourist attraction. Marcus made a difficult decision. He would limit his research to non-invasive observation and work to ensure that the stallion's habitat remained protected. The horse had saved his life by choosing to help a stranger, and Marcus would honor that gift by protecting the animal's freedom and solitude. Late one evening, as Marcus reviewed footage from his trail cameras, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. In the corner of one frame, barely visible in the shadows, stood the unmistakable silhouette of the black stallion. The horse appeared to be watching Marcus's camp from a distance, as if he too remembered their encounter and was curious about the human who had returned to his territory. Marcus realized that their connection had been deeper than he initially understood. The stallion hadn't just saved his life. He had chosen to trust a human being in a way that went against every survival instinct. Now somehow the horse seemed to recognize that Marcus posed no threat to his peaceful existence in the wilderness. As autumn deepened into winter, Marcus prepared to conclude his official research and return to his regular duties. However, he knew that his relationship with the stallion would continue in some form. The horse had taught him something profound about intelligence, compassion, and the connections that could exist between species when trust replaced fear. 1 year after his life-changing encounter with the black stallion, Marcus stood at the edge of the same ravine where his adventure had begun. The seasons had come full circle, and autumn colors once again painted the wilderness in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. In his hand, he held a leather-bound journal filled with observations, photographs, and scientific documentation that would change how the scientific community understood equine intelligence. The journal represented far more than research data. It chronicled the evolution of an extraordinary friendship between human and horse that had developed over months of careful observation. Marcus had learned to communicate with the stallion through subtle gestures and patient consistency, building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than dominance or control. Dr. Rodriguez's final report had been published in the Journal of Animal Cognition, creating waves throughout the scientific community. The paper, titled Exceptional Cognitive Abilities in a Feral Horse Population, presented compelling evidence that some horses possessed intelligence levels previously thought impossible. The stallion's rescue of Marcus had become a case study in animal empathy and problem-solving that challenged decades of established thinking. However, the publication also brought unwanted attention. Wildlife photographers, documentary filmmakers, and researchers from around the world began requesting access to study the remarkable horse. Marcus found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to protect the stallion from the very people who wanted to celebrate his intelligence. Working closely with park administrators, Marcus developed a comprehensive protection plan for the stallion and his territory. The remote area where the horse lived was designated as a special research zone with severely limited access. Only essential personnel were allowed in the area, and all visits required Marcus's approval and supervision. The stallion seemed to understand the changing dynamics around his home territory. During the increased human activity that followed the publication of Dr. Rodriguez's paper, the horse became more elusive, appearing only when Marcus was alone and always maintaining escape routes. His survival instincts remained sharp, despite his willingness to help humans in distress. Marcus had also made progress in unraveling the stallion's mysterious past. Historical research and DNA analysis of hair samples collected from tree branches where the horse had rubbed revealed genetic markers, consistent with cavalry horses from the early 1900s. The stallion was indeed likely a descendant of Thunder or other military horses that had escaped capture during the park's early years. This discovery added another layer of significance to the stallion's story. He represented not just an individual with remarkable intelligence, but a living link to the historical relationship between humans and horses in the American wilderness. His bloodline had survived for over a century through adaptation, intelligence, and an apparently inherited ability to problem-solve in complex situations. During their quiet encounters throughout the research year, Marcus had observed the stallion teaching himself new skills through trial and error. The horse learned to open simple latches, manipulate objects to reach food sources, and even appeared to understand the concept of tools as extensions of his capabilities. Most remarkably, he showed clear evidence of planning future actions rather than simply reacting to immediate stimuli. The bond between Marcus and the stallion had evolved into something unprecedented in wildlife management. The horse would approach Marcus's observation blind and stand quietly nearby, as if checking on his human friend's welfare. Sometimes they would simply share the same space in comfortable silence, each respecting the other's need for solitude while enjoying a connection that transcended species boundaries. As winter approached, Marcus made the decision to conclude his active research and return to his regular ranger duties. The stallion had provided science with invaluable insights into animal cognition, and continuing to study him intensively would serve no purpose beyond satisfying human curiosity. The horse deserved to live his life without constant observation and documentation. On his final official visit to the research site, Marcus was surprised to find the stallion waiting near his observation blind. The horse approached closer than ever before, allowing Marcus to touch his neck and speak quietly to him about the future. It was as if the intelligent animal understood that their formal relationship was ending, but their friendship would continue in a different form. Marcus explained in gentle tones that he would continue to patrol the area and ensure the stallion's protection, but that the intensive research was over. The horse seemed to listen intently, his dark eyes reflecting an understanding that went beyond normal animal comprehension. When Marcus finally turned to leave, the stallion followed him partway back toward the main trail before stopping at his usual boundary and watching until the ranger disappeared from view. The legacy of their encounter extended far beyond the scientific papers and research documentation. Marcus had become a passionate advocate for wildlife protection, using his experience to educate others about the complex inner lives of animals. He spoke at conferences and universities, sharing the stallion's story as evidence that humans had much to learn about the creatures with whom they shared the planet. More importantly, the stallion's rescue of Marcus had created a ripple effect of conservation awareness. The story inspired new research into animal cognition, led to better protection protocols for wildlife habitats, and challenged people to reconsider their relationships with the natural world. Years later, Marcus would still make regular patrols through the stallion's territory. Though their encounters became less frequent as both grew older, the horse remained healthy and alert, continuing to demonstrate the remarkable intelligence that had saved a ranger's life and changed scientific understanding of equine capabilities. Sometimes, during quiet moments in the wilderness, Marcus would catch a glimpse of the black stallion watching him from a distant ridge. In those moments, both man and horse would pause to acknowledge their unique bond, a connection forged in desperation, strengthened by trust, and sustained by mutual respect for the wild places they both called home. The stallion's greatest gift to Marcus hadn't been the rescue itself, but the profound lesson about the intelligence, compassion, and dignity that existed in the animal kingdom. That lesson would guide Marcus's work for the rest of his career, ensuring that future generations of wildlife would benefit from the wisdom gained through one extraordinary encounter between a wild horse and a ranger hanging upside down in a remote ravine.